Adnan Khashoggi was a famous Saudi businessman and arms dealer. In the 1980s, he was one of the richest men in the world. But his wealth and connections weren't the only things that made him famous. He was also known for his extravagant playboy lifestyle. He had 3 official wives, but that wasn't all. He also kept a private harem of 11 young and beautiful women, calling them his pleasure wives. He threw wild parties on his massive yacht with his favorite women and celebrity guests. But what really happened on that yacht? For years, no one knew the whole story. It wasn't until after his death that one of his so-called pleasure wives, former model Jill Dodd, finally spoke out. She revealed the truth about life in Khashoggi's harem. In this video, you'll learn everything about Adnan Khashoggi's secret world, his relationships, and what happened to his wives and mistresses after his death. In the 1980s, Adnan Khashoggi wasn't just rich, but legendary. He had everything: private jets, luxury mansions, and a super yacht bigger than a cruise ship. But what made him truly stand out was his extravagant lifestyle. People called him the Great Gatsby of the Middle East because of his over-the-top spending, wild parties, and connections to the world's most influential people. At his peak in the early 1980s, Khashoggi's net worth was estimated at $4 billion. He made his fortune as the ultimate middleman in the global arms trade. Western defense companies wanted to sell weapons, and the Saudi government wanted to buy them. Khashoggi made the deals happen and took a hefty commission in the process. He earned millions monthly, selling tanks to the French, helicopters to the British, and missiles to the Saudi government. His influence stretched even further, as he also brokered deals with controversial leaders like Libya's Muammar Gaddafi. But Khashoggi wasn't just about weapons. He had a talent for selling luxury goods on a massive scale. He was an international agent for Rolls-Royce, Marconi, and the British Aircraft Company, bringing high-end cars, aircraft, and communication systems to the world's elite. Money was never a problem for him. It poured in faster than he could spend it. Adnan Khashoggi didn't just make billions. He spent them just as fast. He burned through $250,000 a day without blinking during his peak years. For him, money wasn't just a resource, but a way of life. He owned a dozen mansions scattered worldwide, each more extravagant than the last. When he traveled, it wasn't on a regular private jet. It was a massive, custom-designed plane that looked more like a flying palace. And then there was Nabila, his legendary super yacht, named after his daughter. It wasn't just a luxury boat, it was a floating kingdom. Khashoggi hosted non-stop parties on its deck, filled with the world's most beautiful women, celebrities, and power players. These weren't casual get-togethers, but legendary multi-day celebrations of excess, luxury, and absolute indulgence. The guest list on Nabila was as extravagant as the yacht itself. The scene included Vegas dancers, top models, rising Hollywood starlets, and elite escorts. Khashoggi believed beautiful women were essential for any high-profile deal and ensured they were always around. He called them his flowers on the table, and he didn't just keep them for private parties. He brought them along to meetings with royalty, politicians, and business tycoons. But it wasn't just his spending that kept him in the headlines. It was his willingness to flaunt his wealth and lifestyle. He didn't shy away from the cameras. He gave them a complete show if the media wanted a glimpse into his world. The British tabloids, in particular, were obsessed with him, covering every extravagant detail of his life. They couldn't get enough of the man with endless money, women, and power. Adnan Khashoggi had everything a man could dream of. But there was one thing he loved above all else: young, beautiful, glamorous women. He was married 3 times, but that didn't stop him from surrounding himself with a never-ending stream of lovers, most of them stunning models. Khashoggi didn't just date women, he kept an entire private harem, showering each of them with lavish gifts, designer clothes, and sparkling diamonds. He believed that luxury was the ultimate way to keep his women happy, and he spared no expense. His first wife, Sandra Daly, was just 20 years old when she met him. She was an English woman from a modest background, but her life changed overnight when she crossed paths with the billionaire. Khashoggi offered her a job as a translator in London. Before long, he had swept her into his glamorous world. She converted to Islam, took the name Soraya Khashoggi, and in 1961, they married. Their honeymoon wasn't just a vacation, it was a grand tour of the world, filled with luxury beyond imagination. They traveled in style, hopping from one breathtaking location to another, experiencing the finest hotels, yachts, and private estates money could buy. Soraya's life had transformed completely. She had gone from a simple upbringing to being one of the wealthiest women on the planet. For years, she lived in unimaginable luxury. She was always dressed in diamonds, designer gowns, and the finest furs. While other women worried about bills, she flew between their 17 luxurious homes in private jets. Among her close friends were Hollywood legends like Elizabeth Taylor and Frank Sinatra. Khashoggi's properties were nothing short of royal palaces. He owned luxury apartments near Buckingham Palace, sprawling ranches in Kenya, stunning villas in Beirut and Saudi Arabia, and the iconic Olympic Tower in New York, where he bought entire apartment floors and combined them into one massive penthouse. He and Soraya might only stay in each home for a week or two, but all 17 residences were fully staffed year-round with maids, chefs, and butlers, always ready for their arrival. His private jets weren't just a mode of transport, they were flying mansions. Each one had a bedroom suite, and Khashoggi had 2 separate wardrobes on board, one filled with Western suits, the other with traditional Arabic robes, so that he could switch his look depending on the occasion. Soraya had everything a woman could ever want, or so it seemed. But behind the glittering jewels and luxury mansions, life in Khashoggi's world wasn't as perfect as it looked. And as time passed, cracks in the fairy tale began to appear. From the outside, Soraya Khashoggi had unlimited wealth, luxury beyond imagination, and a life most women could only dream of. But behind the dazzling diamonds and designer gowns, she was deeply unhappy and lonely. Her husband, Adnan Khashoggi, was rarely by her side. He was constantly traveling for business, but Soraya knew better. While she stayed home raising their children, he was off spending time with younger women. No matter how much money she had, it couldn't replace the love and companionship she longed for. Over the years, Soraya gave birth to 5 children, 1 daughter and 4 sons. But instead of growing closer, her marriage began to fall apart. Khashoggi's obsession with youth and beauty was no secret. Her husband grew more distant as Soraya aged, especially after having 5 children. He surrounded himself with models and socialites, always looking for his next young conquest. The breaking point came when she was pregnant with their 5th child. Khashoggi left her alone in London, as he often did, but she couldn't ignore her suspicions this time. She had a strong feeling that he was cheating on her with one of her close friends, a model she trusted. Determined to uncover the truth, Soraya hired a private detective. What he found was devastating. Khashoggi was caught on camera with his mistress, proving what Soraya had feared all along. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a humiliation. She had given him everything, and he had thrown it away. That discovery ignited one of the most explosive divorces of the time. Soraya was furious and ready to fight for everything she was owed. She hired Marvin Mitchelson, one of the most feared divorce lawyers in the world, to take Khashoggi down in court. The battle was bitter and highly publicized. It wasn't just about money. Soraya wanted full custody of their children. The divorce dragged their young kids into chaos, turning them into pawns in a legal war. At one point, the situation became so extreme that their children were trapped on a private jet at Heathrow Airport just as it was about to take off. The court had impounded the plane as part of the divorce case, leaving them stranded. Years later, Soraya privately admitted that she regretted putting them through such a painful experience. Despite the ugly battle, their children eventually built successful business and arts careers. And while some tensions remained, they stayed closely connected as a family. Soraya didn't walk away empty-handed. She won one of the largest divorce settlements in history at the time. The exact figure was staggering, a sum that allowed her to continue living in luxury for the rest of her life. But even with all the money, the fairy tale had ended. The glamorous life she once lived was built on illusion. And when the illusion shattered, all that remained was betrayal and heartbreak. For Khashoggi, it was just another chapter in his extravagant life. He moved on, found new women, and continued his lavish lifestyle. But for Soraya, the divorce was the price she paid for being part of his world, and no amount of diamonds could ever make up for that. In 1978, Khashoggi married again, this time to Laura Biancalini, a stunning Italian woman who was just 17 years old when they met. Like his first wife, she converted to Islam and changed her name to Lamia Khashoggi. At first, life with Khashoggi seemed like a dream come true. He spoiled Lamia with gifts, luxury, and exotic vacations, just like with Soraya. She gave birth to their son, Ali, and for a time, she seemed to accept her husband's world of wealth, power, and excess. But Lamia's marriage wasn't much different from Soraya's. Khashoggi was never a faithful husband. His love for young, beautiful women never faded. And no matter how devoted his wives were, he was always looking for the next beauty to add to his life. Unlike Soraya, Lamia never divorced him. She remained legally his wife until he died in 2017, even as he moved on to other relationships. Whether it was loyalty, legal convenience, or financial security, Lamia remained connected to Khashoggi until the very end. However, she remained his wife only formally. In 1991, Khashoggi married for the third time. His new bride was Shapari Azam Zangana, an Iranian socialite who had already built a name for herself in elite circles. Unlike his previous wives, Shapari was not an unknown girl swept up into his world. She was already accustomed to wealth and luxury. Shapari was elegant, well-educated, and had the charm and connections that made her a perfect high society wife. At first, their marriage seemed more stable than his past relationships. But Khashoggi's habits never changed. No matter how beautiful or sophisticated his wife was, he couldn't resist surrounding himself with younger women. After more than 2 decades of marriage, Shapari finally had enough. In 2014, they divorced, ending Khashoggi's third and final legal marriage. Marriage was never enough for Adnan Khashoggi. He wasn't just a billionaire. He was a man who lived without limits, especially when it came to women. Even though he was legally married 3 times, he always had many more women in his life. Khashoggi didn't just have mistresses, he kept a private harem. It was reported that he had at least 12 women who were referred to as his pleasure wives. These weren't official wives legally, but were just as important to Khashoggi. The women in Khashoggi's harem were young, stunningly beautiful, and handpicked to be part of his exclusive world. They came from all over the world: fashion models, actresses, Vegas showgirls, and even socialites. Some were just starting their careers, while others were already well known in elite circles. Khashoggi treated his harem like a collection of rare jewels. Each woman was dressed in designer clothes, draped in diamonds, and given the finest luxuries. He made sure they lived in his palaces, flew on his private jets, and attended his extravagant yacht parties, where celebrities, royals, and influential businessmen surrounded them. But life in the harem wasn't just about glamour. These women were expected to entertain, impress, and always be available. Khashoggi paraded them like trophies at his business meetings, believing that having beautiful women around impressed world leaders and business tycoons. One of the young women in Adnan Khashoggi's life was Jill Dodd, a 20-year-old American model working in Paris. She was building her career, appearing on magazine covers and attending high-profile events. But despite her success, she felt that something was missing. One summer, her agent invited her to Monte Carlo for the weekend. At first, she was unsure. Trips like these usually had strings attached, but when she was told it was completely free, she decided to go, seeing it as a chance to take a break. After arriving, she spent the day by the pool, relaxing, talking to new people, and enjoying the beautiful scenery. Her agent took her to an exclusive party overlooking the Mediterranean Sea that evening. The event was extravagant, filled with music, luxury, and well-known guests. During the party, she noticed an older man watching her. He eventually approached her, and they spent time together, talking and enjoying the evening. But then he did something that completely caught her off guard. He took her arm, pushed up her sleeve, and wrote, "I love you" on her skin, using his own blood. Instead of being shocked, Jill was charmed by the dramatic gesture. It was at that moment that she realized Khashoggi was not just a billionaire businessman and arms dealer. He was also an incredible romantic. He didn't just buy women's attention, he made them fall for him with grand, unforgettable gestures. That night, Jill was completely drawn in. She had just met Adnan Khashoggi, one of the world's richest and most powerful men, and her life was about to change forever. A few weeks after their first meeting, Adnan Khashoggi invited 20-year-old Jill Dodd to Spain. She was excited, believing their relationship was progressing like any other romance. But what happened next was not what she expected. When she leaned in to kiss him, he gently stopped her. Then, in his usual confident and composed manner, he explained that their relationship could only continue under specific conditions. If she wanted to be with him, she had to agree to become one of his pleasure wives. Khashoggi laid out his rules. He could legally have 3 official wives and up to 11 pleasure wives, and he wanted Jill to be one of them. He even offered her a 5-year contract, promising to take care of her completely in exchange for her loyalty and availability at any time of the day. "I want to take care of you. I want to make a 5-year contract with you. I'll provide everything for you, and you will be at my beck and call 24 hours a day," he told her. Jill knew exactly who Khashoggi was, a married man, a billionaire, a businessman with a harem of women. And yet, despite everything, she said yes. She didn't see it as something shameful or unusual. She was completely charmed by him. Their contract was never written down, only spoken, but that was enough for her. That night, they spent their first evening together as a couple. Jill was young and naive, but she was deeply drawn to Khashoggi. Even years later, she would insist that she loved him and never saw herself as anything other than his partner. As time passed, Jill became fully immersed in Khashoggi's world. At first, his extravagant lifestyle felt strange. The private jets, the exclusive parties, the luxurious gifts. But slowly, it became her normal. One day in Kenya, Khashoggi offered her a massive 20-carat diamond ring. She was so overwhelmed by the gesture that she refused to accept it. But over time, she started to crave that kind of luxury. She saw other women in his circle wearing jaw-dropping jewels, and soon, she wanted them too. Couture gowns became her standard evening wear. She dined on gourmet meals prepared by private chefs, traveled in limousines, and flew on private jets without a second thought. Even when she wasn't with Khashoggi, she missed that extravagant lifestyle. While working as a model in Los Angeles, she looked for ways to recreate it. She started seeking out fine dining experiences, even if none of her girlfriends could afford them. She'd go with a doctor friend just to feel that same elegance and exclusivity. Without even realizing it, Jill had been completely transformed. The simple girl who once felt out of place in Khashoggi's world had now fully embraced it. She had become one of his women, one of many drawn in by his charm, wealth, and ability to make women feel special. Years later, Jill would reflect on this chapter of her life in her memoir, The Currency of Love, a courageous journey to finding the love within. She now sees how young and naive she was at the time, but back then, at the moment, it all felt exciting, glamorous, and impossible to resist. At first, Jill Dodd was completely captivated by the luxurious world Khashoggi had introduced her to. But over time, the illusion started to fade. Her glamorous life as one of his pleasure wives came at a price. Constant competition, uncertainty, and emotional strain. It's hard to believe, but 22-year-old Jill compared herself to the younger women in Khashoggi's harem and felt a bit old next to them. Eventually, the stress took a toll on her health, and she was diagnosed with severe anxiety. The excitement of being in Khashoggi's world was no longer enough to keep her happy. The turning point came during a trip to Las Vegas. While she was out with the other women in his circle, she noticed another woman proudly showing off a brand new ring. It was identical to the one Khashoggi had given Jill. At that moment, it hit her. She wasn't special, and their relationship was just part of a much bigger pattern. Shortly after that night, she decided to leave. Their relationship ended, and to her surprise, she felt more relief than heartbreak. She later reflected on the experience, saying, "I realized that chasing happiness through wealth is like running after your own shadow. There is no magic object or amount of money that makes a person feel whole and at peace. Peace isn't found in objects, power, status, or riches." Despite everything, Jill has never poorly spoken about Khashoggi. She has said she didn't regret their time together and still remembers him fondly. Jill Dodd's life turned out well in the end. She eventually left the world of luxury and excess behind and built a stable, happy life. Today, she has been happily married for over 20 years and lives in California with her husband and 3 children. Looking back, she fondly remembers her time with Khashoggi and only speaks well of him. For her, it was a unique chapter in her life, but one she left behind without regret. But Adnan Khashoggi's own story did not have a happy ending. In his final years, his empire crumbled. The man who once spent $250,000 daily living among the world's most potent elites lost almost everything. He was accused of shady dealings, faced legal troubles, and watched his fortune disappear. His harem was long gone. After all, the young and beautiful women who once surrounded him only cared about his money. When his wealth dried up, so did their loyalty. His second and third wives also left him, proving that even the women he married had no reason to stay once his power faded. At one point, he was so desperate for cash that he had to sell his famous $70 million yacht, where he had thrown extravagant parties for royalty and celebrities. The buyer? Donald Trump. But in the end, when Khashoggi was at his weakest, sick and powerless, the only person who stood by him was his first wife, Soraya. In his last years, he suffered from Parkinson's disease and was hospitalized at St. Thomas's Hospital in London under a fake name to avoid public attention. And the only woman who was there for him, who cared for him, who pushed his wheelchair and sat by his bedside, was the wife he had betrayed so many times. Despite everything, the affairs, the humiliation, the divorce, Soraya forgave him. In those last days, they found peace together, rejoicing in the fact that they had become grandparents. No matter what had happened between them, their bond was unbreakable. When Khashoggi passed away, Soraya was devastated. But what about her own fate? The glamorous socialite who once flew in private jets and lived in palaces is now just an ordinary, elderly woman, pushing a shopping cart and wearing a funny little hat. People say her fortune is long gone, and she now struggles to make ends meet. Adnan Khashoggi once had everything: money, women, power. But in the end, none of it lasted. Wealth fades, beauty fades, power disappears. And when it was all gone, the only thing remaining was the person he had hurt the most, but still cared for him. For all the money he made, for all the women he had, he ended up with nothing. His life reminds us that riches can buy luxury, but can't buy true loyalty. And when the money is gone, only real love remains. What impressed you most about this story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching.